Thank you, STLTV. We would like to call to order today's Housing, Urban Development and Zoning Committee meeting. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Alderman Cone,
Present.
Alderwoman Schweitzer,
Present.
Alderwoman Sanye,
Present.
Alderman Browning. Present. Chair Clark Hubbard.
Here.
We have 5 present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. I will accept a motion for the approval of the minutes from Tuesday, June 6th.
Motion, so it's moved.
So moved. I'm sorry, I didn't get it.
Moved and seconded.
Okay.
Call the roll.
Alderman Cone,
Aye.
Alderwoman Schweitzer,
Aye.
Alderwoman Sanye,
Aye.
Alderman Browning,
Aye.
Chair Clark Hubbard.
Aye.
We have 5 aye votes.
All right. With that, I will hand the baton over to Vice Chair Sanye, so I can move around for item number 1.
Alrighty. I'll just give you a little second to get over there. Okay, and item number 1 on our agenda is Board Bill number 37. Alderwoman Clark, you are recognized, Clark Hubbard, you are recognized to speak to this bill.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Sanye. I want to make sure that everyone has seen the clean copy, the committee sub that was in the drive.
I have.
Okay.
I have.
So this is our second hearing on this. We had, well, if you want to call it the second, this is our second hearing on Board Bill 37, which someone pointed out to me the other day, the irony of it being Board Bill 37 and it's $37 million, right? And they pointed that out. I was like, I had never thought of that as much as I've read on it now. But we talked about this last time, and just to reiterate, you know, this legislation passed unanimously about almost going on 2 years ago. Down here at the board, we sent a united and concerted message to North St. Louis that it's time. We see them, we hear them, and it's time to reinvest while we have the sources, while we have the resources available, right? And I know there's been some different conversations. I'm looking forward to the conversations today. But I'm still asking for your support and do pass a recommendation on Board Bill 37, now committee sub. Just noting some of the biggest and the main things is that North St. Louis has been uniquely disinvested in for so long. And comparison is really a tool that people use, not only to deflect, but to distract from what real messages are being sent here. So today I want us to keep in our hearts and our minds, take away race, take away north and south, other than the fact that we are talking about the north side. But in comparison, don't use that as a tool to divide the conversation. Think of it as a way to unite this conversation, for us to continue to send this message to North St. Louis, that the city of St. Louis, and us as their aldermen, realize, accept in some ways, and are now ready to make right some of the wrongs that were made towards North St. Louis, most especially here in this opportunity towards businesses. So with that, I'll accept any questions, comments, and we can move forward.
We can go in order of seniority for questions, comments. Alderman Cone.
I don't have any questions.
I also want to make sure that I note that SLDC is here. Director Neil Richardson, and I know his name, but I'm trying to think of his title.
Knuckles.
I mean, look, the Lance Knuckles. It's not his birthday like it was a week ago, but, you know, he still gets the attention today. That they are here as well to answer questions. I don't know, I probably need to just go ahead and swear them in, just to be on the safe side if they have any questions for them.
Do
can
you
do that
affirm
now.
to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you so much. I have a few questions about the amount of money and the expected ability to spend all of it or to encumber all of it by the date currently set by for ARPA funds.
Thank you. So is that the question or the comment?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's more of a question,
Yeah.
you know, with
Okay.
the bill as it is, as you've presented it today. You know, $37 million is a lot of money to, you know, encumber. In terms of, has there been demonstrated enough people to apply for this in the time that is needed for the encumbering of the funds as it is now?
Yes, I will say, from people that I hear from, we probably could have spent $37 million 4 or 5 times 4 or 5 years ago in North St. Louis. So yes, I absolutely also believe in the work that SLDC has done to stand this program up, because when it was first passed, that work hadn't been done.
Right.
Applications had been put in, but that work hadn't been done. So now, on top of that, we have businesses and people that absolutely qualify for this, had hope in this, but hadn't had and sometimes not even a word from this because of the fixes, the fixes that needs to be made, but also the program that needed to be stood up behind it. I don't know that they can speak to how many or specific applications that are in place, but we know there are applications in place. I don't know if they would even exceed the 37 million. I would like to believe they do. Because again, I hear from businesses all the time that have needed this support for a long time, right? And have not been eligible for this kind of support. So now, the idea that we would not be able to spend 37 million in North St. Louis, when I ride North St. Louis daily and can see where we can put 37 million plus some, I don't think that would be a question. But I understand, to your point, wanting to know, you know, if we could do it or not. I don't have the crystal ball that I wish we had down here sometimes, but I do believe that this money can be not only spent, but well spent with businesses that have weathered this storm in North St. Louis for so long.
Right, yeah, I agree with you. I'm sure there's no shortage I know there's no shortage of need. It's just getting the applications in, having the applications meet all the guidelines they need to meet, making sure that, you know, is there a specific amount per building that's expected, or?
No.
Okay.
And to your point, the fixes that were made opened up those barriers that you
Right.
just spoke about.
Right.
So had they not been made, the barriers would have continued, and,
Right.
you know, it
Yeah,
would have been
I
essential.
remember that discussion when we were talking about this fund being about the parameters that were in the bill around the fund, who was going to be facilitating the grant applications, who was going to handle that, CDA, SLDC, and having that conversation. I can see that a lot of work has been done to, has been done to make sure that all of those things are in line. So the application will be ready by August 1st, 2023. Can you talk a little bit about the information process to get the applications out into the public? Do you have any idea how that will be done, or?
I'll bring them up, but
Okay.
again, because this went on 2 years ago, there are people that I do want us to note and be aware that there are people that have had applications in since then, since the
On
first
what
time it
form?
opened up.
So, okay,
Right? This was fixes to a bill that we all unanimously voted on and
Right.
passed starting in 2021. I ran the timeline down last time. So people have already had applications in. It's not closed, and I'll bring them up so that they can answer about the application process, because that's not
Yeah.
any of our role here as alderperson, not only to know who applied or not applied, but to track who applied or not
Of course.
applied, you know, but with
I
that, I'll
just say the SLDCA was creating an application form using standardized language.
Mm-hmm.
Said applications will be ready to use by applicants by August 1st. So have people applied already? And I'm not sure that I'm getting that clear.
Good afternoon, Alderman Schweitzer.
Hi.
Lance Knuckles again, Senior Vice President, St. Louis Development Corporation. So current at this moment in time, at the end of the last reporting month, we had 181 applications that have been submitted.
For north of St. Louis,
Based
north of
upon the
St. Louis,
parameters
based on-
in Board Bill 82 as it was legislated in the past, based upon those parameters, yes, ma'am, there are 181 applications that have been submitted.
far exceeding the amount of funds?
So I can't tell you the amount of dollars, I don't have that in front of me, but I can definitely find that number for you and bring it back to this body as requested for sure. But I will say that in these 181 businesses, they spanned all three of the programs that were designed in the original program, original legislation, as well as we have engaged the consultant services of National Development Council, which is a national small business advisory organization who has now been actively engaging with these 181 businesses to ensure that they're starting to work out their financial documents, having a series of financial documents ranging from a balance sheet, profit and loss, and projections to support their business sustainability, as well as beginning to work on a short 2-page business plan to support these businesses having a better understanding about where they sit as they look to move forward. And so that work is happening now, and we are in a position that once new legislation is brought to us, we can modify that original application to meet whatever parameters come out of Board Bill 37 to be able to execute within the time frame that you all have asked. I think it's the August 1st deadline, or target date to have a new application be submitted.
Okay, so you have there's some applications that are in for a program, but they'd have to put in new applications. People who have already 118 businesses, they're going to be informed they have to put in new applications.
Alderman Schweitzer, it's 181 businesses.
Thank you.
But a part of the resource services that National Development Council will provide will be to support those businesses retrofitting, if needed, into the new application form to remove some of the challenges from those small businesses to stay competitive within the process.
Okay, and is that why the boundaries were expanded outside of the commercial corridors? Because applications are coming in from outside the commercial
You
corridors?
are asking me a conversation that's legislatively driven, not by me. That's not a question I can respond to.
Okay, I guess then, Alderwoman Clark-Hubbard, do you mind answering, why the boundaries were changed? And I apologize if all of this,
No, I understand what you're saying. What he's
trying
saying,
to
and
figure out where.
I know, right? This is what so we understand our role here, and we understand our role as legislators then to guide the administrative part of the policies that we create, right? The guidelines and the boundaries were expanded because there were barriers in there that cut off areas that we know if we are trying to really make investments into North St. Louis, that they didn't follow those boundaries. And so it went under the EGI, and we didn't have EGI when we had Board Bill 82 that we unanimously passed, but we had HUD qualified census tract. We absolutely had disinvestment in North St. Louis, and then there were also some areas that when you're talking about really making intentional investments and you want it to be sustainable, then you make sure that you don't cut off just, the way that it was cut off. Some of them were cut off. No specific ones, just some of them were cut off. If you remember, if you want to go back, I can read you the old boundaries. They're very specific.
Yeah.
This one, you want me to read?
That was an interesting, I remember that being a very fraught conversation, because a lot of these things, had this existed, would have made that conversation a lot easier than to use sort of this index. Yeah, I appreciate it. I always enjoy asking you questions because you're always so nice when you put people in their place.
No,
like it was unanimous, Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Yeah,
Yes,
no.
Yes, Alderman Clark-Hubbard.
No, I'm not, and I don't mean, I hope I don't come off like that. I'm just reminding us,
No.
of the efforts that I like when we come together, right?
I hear
And
that.
sometimes people intentionally bring conversations down here that are divisive
Yeah.
and have divisive undertones. So I want to make sure that we are, especially our new colleagues, understand where this came from.
Right.
Nobody's walking around St. Louis with blindfolds on. We know what North St. Louis looks like.
Right.
So, that's
this-
the only reason why I say that like that.
Oh, and I'm always very impressed by your your way of handling things. I remember this being part of a larger bill, and this was the part of it that was specifically earmarked for North St. Louis, and I think that is important. So I appreciate you speaking on this today and answering my questions, and thank you SLDC for being here too. Really appreciate it. That's it. Thanks.
Okay. Alderman Browning?
And this might be a question for SLDC, but are applicants whose business closed during COVID eligible to apply?
Good afternoon, Alderman Browning. So a business, based upon information that we have, a business that was in operation or is desiring to start would be eligible based upon the existing parameters that were provided. In addition, that would also be supportive of a startup that would be starting a business in that same geographic area that has been predetermined by Board Bill 82.
Excellent, thank you. And is there a reason that there's a requirement that an applicant must have a building in the area and it does not apply to those who provide services in these areas? I am being asked this specifically by some constituents that provide programs in the designated areas, but would not be eligible because they are not located in North City.
So I would say, based upon the legislation that this body actually brought forward, the language did speak to a business that was owned and or operated within that geographic area. And so there was not any clear guidance on whether or not a business was located, for example, in the county but provided services in the city. That parameter wasn't necessarily provided. So at SODC, we were presuming to move with the focus of supporting businesses that are located and do business in the city of St. Louis or in that geographic area.
Okay, thank you. I have no more questions. Appreciate it.
All right, that makes it my turn. I just have a question maybe for SLDC too. I was just curious, assuming the bill goes through, is there a timeline for getting, the funds and resources out?
Honorwoman Sane, based upon any guidelines that would come out from the new legislation, if there was a timeline for getting a new application submitted, we would adhere to that. I think the more important piece is that it relates to having funds be encumbered. We would be responsible for encumbering those dollars by 12/31/24, which would mean that any applicant who's applied, that we would have them into a contract agreement, identifying the use of those funds and have that contract signed and executed prior to 12/31/24, with the ability for program dollars to be expended on that contract through 12/31/26.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
That completes my questions.
Madam Chair, I have some
I just want to,
questions.
can I speak to one question before we move forward?
Okay.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I did receive similar questions to you, Alderman Browning, and I'm going to try to answer those questions. I asked people to specifically email me where they saw that in the language so that I could respond to that, but I do want to respond in another way, and not to specifically to who asked that question, which we haven't named or not named, but I want to respond to the fact that we all together passed this legislation, and then we went to a press conference at MC Appliance on the 4500 block of Martin Luther King. And we stood with our mayor, Mayor Jones, and we stood with our Congresswoman Bush, and our colleagues, and recommitted this effort to reinvest in a business that is absolutely weathered the pandemic storm, has still weathered that storm. MC Appliance is still open at 4501 Martin Luther King. There might be a little plug, but it is. We stood there and we committed that. So having your feet in the ground in North St. Louis and having kept your feet in the ground in North St. Louis, I think is absolutely the message that we want to send in the business that we would need to reinvest in, that we would want to reinvest in, right? And so having a building or not having a building, you heard SLD say that the startups is an option, but what we do know for sure, which is why we opened up the satellite office, thank you for that, at Sumner High School, is a lot of the businesses in North St. Louis don't have the capacity or the back office, or haven't had the capacity in the back office to even fill out an application like this, to even, deal with that, because they're on the day-to-day trying to hang on and manage and run their business. So the fact that they have set up not only that office at Sumner, and then they have the resources they are putting in place with these people that are going to relook at these applications day one. They're going to be ready day one when we pass this legislation to get this moving. It's all the more reason why, technical or not, I think that we should have people that have been over there, receive this step up and this leg up that we committed to them and that we should continue to commit to them. Startups, again, he said, but the idea that some businesses in other parts of the city that absolutely have the capacity, absolutely will have the way to fill this out right now while we're in this hearing committee and get it done. But we know that there's mom and pop shops, for lack of a better way to put it, over in North St. Louis that don't have that. That application might be on the table. I would hate for their chance to be ripped out for someone that could take advantage of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Cone?
Thank you. I'm not sure if it's Director or Vice President Knuckles. Would you mind coming to the podium? I have a few questions for you.
Yes, sir.
So you stated that there were 181 applicants. How many of those applicants are actually located within the North City corridors?
All of those applicants are within the guidelines of Board Bill 82.
So
As
all
dis-
of them fit within the designated corridors that were part of the original Board Bill 82. So that would be the North City commercial corridors as defined in this section and are both sides of the street comprising each corridor. North Grand will run from Del Mar to Blair. Dr. Martin Luther King will run from North Jefferson to the city limits. West Florissant, or the Florissant corridor, will run along Florissant from St. Louis to 14th. North Broadway will run from North Broadway to Halls Ferry to Christian Avenue. Natural Bridge will run along from Fair to the city limits. West Florissant Avenue will run from Highway 70 to Acme. And the Del Mar corridor will run along from Union to Taylor. Del Mar East corridor will run along from North Spring to 22nd. Goodfellow from Del Mar to the city limits. Union from Page to West Florissant. Page from Vandeventer to Martin Luther King. All 181 of those applicants fit within either both sides of those streets, those corridors.
Alderman Cone, the 181 businesses fit within the parameters as defined in Board Bill 82. That parameter, both those specific corridors that you just defined, as well as community need corridors or neighborhoods where a corridor passed through a neighborhood and that neighborhood was in a HUD qualified census tract. So there are businesses that are not located on the corridor, but that are within the program guidelines in which within the Board Bill 82 legislation.
Board Bill 82 did not specify HUD qualified census tracts where those corridors ran through them.
It talked about neighborhoods adjoining, so excuse me, I'll stand corrected. Thank you very much, Alderman Cone. It did speak to where a neighborhood passed through a corridor, the business would be eligible based upon meeting a community need.
So we're here today to redefine the definition of the program boundaries, the geographic boundaries of this program.
Is that a question, Alderman?
We're not changing any of the program itself. We're not changing the application process. We're not changing what the program can do. We're not changing any of the programmatic directives aside from the geography.
Alderman Cone, I think it is at the pleasure of this body to make some of those final decisions.
As it's currently written, is it changing any of the program directives that SLDC has outlined in its application?
That SODC has outlined in its application?
Correct.
I think the application that we drafted, Alderman Cone, was in response to the legislation. And so if there's any legislative changes at this body, we would need to make those necessary adjustments.
And
to be
this
in
board bill does not change any of those as it's currently written.
I'll yield that question to the Alderwoman who's actually presented the board bill for consideration.
Alderwoman.
What specifically are you asking, what change are you asking about? Other than that, you said the geography, absolutely it changed the geography, not from north, not from the idea of the
But
bill.
does it change any of the programmatic? Does it change the application? Does it change the purpose? Does it change any of the?
Doesn't change the purpose, absolutely not. There are some minor fixes in there that had to be done. Like, for instance, having all of your capital up front, a barrier, like Alderwoman Schweitzer talked about. I don't think the application is a private thing. We can pull up the application or maybe have someone print up if you want to see if there's something specific you want to ask about the application, but no, it doesn't. The only thing is, it doesn't change that. It doesn't change the idea of reinvesting into North St. Louis.
Thank you. Mr. Knuckles.
Alderman Cone.
When this was first created, did we have the EJI in place?
The EGI was not in place when Board Bill 82 was legislated.
How much did we spend developing the EJI and the associated action plan?
That will have to be a question I'll have to yield to my leader, Mr. Neil Richardson, and I don't know if you have that.
Yeah, so with, in partnership with PGAV, as well as CDFA and Erica Henderson supporting us on this, it was approximately $400,000 for the Economic Justice Action Plan in totality, not just the Economic Justice Index. The Economic Justice Index was just one component of the overall action plan itself.
Correct, thank you. So $400,000, Director Richardson. Sorry. I'm not finished. So, and how much time did that take?
It took approximately 9 months from beginning to end, from when we first engaged with the consultant to actually rolling it out at the Mayor's Business Luncheon, I believe in October of 2022.
And how many community meetings were held?
Several. There were, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but in addition to the community meetings, we also leveraged many of the previous plans that had already been established, from the Equitable Economic Development Framework, the 2030 Jobs Plan, the Ferguson Commission Report, because again, knowing our constituents have been over-engaged in a lot of ways and giving feedback, this plan was really about prioritizing and implementing some of the key areas within the plans that have already been created, and that's why it's an action plan and just not a study that was created.
And I appreciate that action. Action speaks a lot louder than words. I have printed a copy for all of the members of the committee here of just the index portion of the plan. I didn't want to use all the paper printing off the entire Economic Justice Action Plan here. The Economic Justice Index, can you tell me some of the different factors that go into defining the index?
Yeah, so it's broken up into two key parts. The first is indicators of need. Was the area red line according to the homeowners loan corporation maps? Does the area contain a high number of unoccupied lots? Is the unemployment rate high? Are the residents predominantly black? Is the area in a HUD qualified census tract? So those are the indicators of need. But then there's indicators of opportunity that are blended in order to develop the index. And so the indicators of opportunity include 5 key areas. One, is there a commercial corridor with ongoing construction activity? Is there an opportunity zone and or historic district or opportunity sites present? Does the area contain grassroots organizations like a community development corporation? And then the final one, is there an existing special business district, community improvement district, tax increment financing district, or transportation development district?
Thank you. And EGI 1 and 2 neighborhoods, would you say that those neighborhoods have seen significant disinvestment?
I would say they have their own unique challenges. Some areas have income challenges. Other areas have challenges with vacancy and dilapidation of properties, of disinvestment around commercial corridors, and population decline, and then also the geography. But overall, what the Economic Justice Index does is identify the lowest scores, represent areas that have the highest need and highest opportunity.
And would you mind, I believe you have a copy of this in front of you, on page 13, it's the second page of the document. Can you just read the last sentence of EJI 1? Or the last 2 sentences?
Sure, but I would like to make sure that there's context holistically. I just don't want to make sure that, again, we speak to everything in totality. We're not sharing misinformation or partial information with the public. So I can read the entire EJI 1. As the Economic Justice Index map predicts, these areas are concentrated in North St. Louis, primarily west of Interstate 70, and east of Union Boulevard, both north and south of Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard. The concentrations shown in yellow and noted as EJI 1 are primarily in the neighborhoods immediately north of downtown, including Columbus Square, St. Louis Place, Old North, and Hyde Park neighborhoods, those that line with Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard, in the Jeff Vanderloo, Vandervender, Ville, Greaterville, Lewis Place, Kingsway East, Kingsway West, Fountain Park, Academy, Hamilton Heights, and parts of the West End neighborhood. Other pockets falling in EJI 1 or EJI 2 on the Economic Justice Index, noting high need and opportunity, are located in South St. Louis, in Graveway Park, Dutchtown, and Marina Villa. These areas share many of the same characteristics as those of high need in North St. Louis and should be a priority focus area for SLDC.
So I just want to be clear because, we're all about transparency down here. I know you want to paint a holistic picture here. Would you say the area of Marine Villa, Graveway Park, Mount Pleasant, or Dutchtown, do you think that they contain a high number of unoccupied lots?
I would say based on the Economic Justice Index, and not going off of what I think, but on the data, it states that falls in that category.
Would that same area have a high unemployment rate?
Yes, I don't have the unemployment rate numbers in front of me for those areas, but again, based on it being an Economic Justice Index area 1 and 2, it takes into a calculus. It's not just saying unemployment rate is high and vacancy is high, so it automatically get EJI 1. It has to take in many factors. I'm just giving you the calculus of how this is determined, and I don't have that information in front of me around the number of the unemployment rate for Marina Villa versus an area in North St. Louis City. I just don't have that information in front of me right now.
So let me just share. Graveway Park, Marine Villa, Dutchtown has the highest concentration of youth, highest density of young people,
Yes.
one of the highest concentrations of crime, one of the highest concentrations of child poverty, one of the highest concentrations of unemployment. On the south side of the city, it also has the highest concentration of vacant buildings, vacant lots, and all of the things that we find all too common in North St. Louis. I find it painfully clear that some of my colleagues aren't as familiar with Southeast City. I invite you all to come down and see the challenges that we face every single day. I have gunfire in front of my house every week right now. My neighbors, my business owners, the few that stay, the few that choose to invest, many of them are people of color. Many of them are immigrants. Many of them have to deal with a vacant building next door to them that's crumbling in on top of their business, that's a daycare. A vacant building crumbling down next door to where children are playing. We have rolling gun battles in the middle of the day happening on a street that has 7,000 cars per day, that has one of the major bus routes in the city with major pedestrian traffic, with rolling gun battles. We have young people who I have been fighting for years to get any kind of resources, whether that's additional programming at our rec center, to keep a pool open at the rec center, even though it wasn't in my ward at the time. When I first got elected 14 years ago, we didn't have a Boys and Girls Club. We had children on every block. We have unhoused communities that are roving the alleyways, the railroad, our streets, that are squatting in the vacant properties that line our blocks. We have some capacity that has been built up by neighbors through pure grit. They are fighting every single day to keep their businesses open. Every single day. this board bill, let's talk about the application process, Director Richardson. Tell me about the scoring system that's part of Section 8. I presume that it's still part of the scoring system that we proposed for applicants in the past.
Because my Section 8 looks different.
Section 8 is, it says scoring. It's the scoring process for, and
For any development in the city?
no, for the applications.
Section 7?
I'm sorry, my pages are out of order here.
Oh, okay. So what, and your question is about additional scoring or the original scoring? I see it is Section
Yeah,
7.
section-
Thank you,
yes,
Alderman
Thank
Sparks.
you. Section 7 on page 10.
I'll read it so that the people listening will have clarity on whatever, with your specific questions.
Sure.
SLDC will score applications using criteria defined for each program. During the scoring process, SLDC may award an application additional points if the small business or nonprofit is located within a North City commercial corridor as defined in Section 3, able to demonstrate it will provide other funding for completion of the project that take away from when originally you had to have your funding up front. A minority-owned business enterprise or woman-owned business enterprise owned and operated by an individual residing within or immediately adjacent to the neighborhood in which the small business and nonprofit is located, employs full-time individuals residing within the immediately adjacent to neighborhood in which the small business or nonprofit is located.
So I'd like to just call out any applicant that applies for this money would get ranked. Part A of Section 7, located within a North City commercial corridor as defined in Section 3. So they would get extra points, correct, Director Richardson? So if they were an applicant that had their business on MLK as defined in Section 3, they would get additional points through the scoring process.
Based on this legislation, yes.
If they were a minority-owned business, they would get additional points.
SLDC will follow the guidelines that's provided through this legislation for us to implement and score the projects.
Thank you. I voted for the original board bill 2 years ago. 2 years ago, we didn't spend $400,000 and spend approximately a year developing the Economic Justice Action Plan. 2 years ago, we had not fully allocated all of the ARPA funds. We are now at a place where all of those ARPA funds have been allocated. Two years ago, we were talking about supporting businesses along disinvested areas of the city and preferably women and minority-owned businesses. 2 years ago, we were talking about specific streets in North St. Louis that were chosen by particular alder people who are no longer here and many people at the time that we were discussing that were still concerned about how the money would be spent, how the program would be created. None of that was really in the board bill. SLDC has painstakingly, and I commend them for their efforts, to create an application process and a scope of work for these grant applications. So, as many of the people on the committee already know, I do plan on offering an amendment, but I do believe in my heart of hearts that we need to be considerate of the data and the tools that we have painstakingly taken the time, the public's money to create, and that of other stakeholders and benefactors, and utilize that information to inform our decisions down here at the Board of Aldermen. Thank you.
Want me to respond a little? Okay, I'll just say, just a few things before he, moves forward with his. I understand, respect your position, and you know that, Alderman Cone. You can look at me, and you know that. But in our conversations, I've also shared with you about the message that I believe and the efforts that I believe we wanted to send and put forth towards North St. Louis. We didn't need an EGI study to know the disinvestment in North St. Louis. And I talked earlier about comparison being a tool for division. So when you begin a conversation with comparing it to one, that's where it starts. Everybody knows that when I'm down here, I always put forth my best of best tries to bring us together on issues, to have conversations, to your point, to be transparent. But at the same time, I also can identify when things are being spun in a way that would cause us to be in divisive mindsets rather than the greater good. Even with the EGI, you can look at this map and see the disparity, even if you just look at the colors. So nobody is saying, I believe none of my colleagues would sit and say that there's not a need in one place or not a need in another place. But we can identify, we can agree upon, and we can acknowledge a greater need. And when we're talking about serving for the greater good down here and stuff that we had already moved forward on and keeping the integrity and the message of what we had already moved forward on and not specifically calling out people, places, or things, just the overall city of St. Louis and the disparity, the disinvestment that we all know this isn't a boogeyman in the room, or we know what happened, and this is our opportunity to do that. I think whoever put it forth, we should all be called to continue the effort for people that, as we heard today, have already been waiting before the 2 years, waiting before the 14 years that you got down here, you said, you spoke of, waiting before plenty of us. So again, you know I respect you, and I say it all the time. We all down here to fight we are called to fight for our respective communities and for our constituencies. But I believe that even in your constituency, with the experiences that you're experiencing now that people have experienced for generations of their life, right? That they would even agree that this that was already in place should move forward in the same spirit that it was, not forsaking the two small areas that you referenced in some of your comments before. So with that, I will move forward. Vice Chair Sanye with his amendment.
Okay.
If you, I thought you said you.
Committee substitute before us.
Oh.
We're currently debating the committee substitute. The committee substitute would need to be adopted before the amendment.
Okay.
I move to adopt the committee substitute to Board Bill 37.
Second.
Previous row.
Objection.
Okay.
Call the roll.
You need to call the roll.
You can call the roll.
Alderman Cone,
Present.
Alderwoman Schweitzer,
Aye.
Alderwoman Sanye,
Aye.
Alderman Browning,
Aye.
Chair Clark Hubbard.
Aye.
I have 1 present and 4 aye votes.
I also saw that we have Alderwoman Boyd here. I don't know if, or any other alders, I saw someone else too, if you all want a chance to speak. I just want to make sure I give you that if you would like that opportunity, since this, okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Had to walk all the way. I should be the most athletic person in the whole world. I am speaking in support of this because, as everyone in this room knows, the North Quarter has been neglected for years, not just 1 year, not just 2. I've been in that community since 1982, and we start seeing the decline. But it was real interesting to me when I started doing the research and I found out that we had money that was able to come to our community, but it didn't. And they used the numbers that were in our community to get these dollars. And so when SLDC came in and they had to change, and Neil Richardson, ironically, when this administration was first elected, Neil Richardson did a presentation to the Black Caucus. And his main focus was the neglect of North Quarter. And so he was really pushing to say, for years, this area has been neglected to decline. And it's interesting because most of the housing in the North Quarter has fabulous brick homes that people invested in. We have people that lived in our communities, that moved in our communities and was excited to be a part of those communities. And they worked at the auto plants, and they had these great jobs. And then they got older and they moved on, but the community was still there. St. Louis Magazine did a story on our North Point community and said it was still thriving, that people were still coming to move into this community. So it's a need there for these dollars, for these businesses, because you had the mom and pop stores that were really supplying our community with a lot of services that they didn't have in other areas, that they didn't have to go to Chesterfield to get. They didn't have to go to St. Peter's. They didn't even have to go downtown because it was in our communities. And so as those people were committed to staying in that community, nobody was there to support them, to help them stay abreast in those communities to do the work. And so I think that's why it's so critical that we ensure that these people aren't forgotten. Because I get it, you know, the city wants to build a downtown, and they want to build a Central West End, and they want to build the South City. Certain parts of South City has had a lot of building up. But again, nothing has happened in the North Quarter. And so as a city that keeps practicing on equality and want to make sure everybody is serviced, why would we not ensure that these businesses are serviced so they can stay in those committees that they're committed to? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
I would like to be recognized for the purposes of introducing an amendment to Board Bill 37 Committee Substitute.
Okay, you recognize Alderman Cone?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There should be an amendment in the Google Drive, possibly two. Do we have copies? Madam Clerk?
One amendment.
So let's see what amendments out there. Yeah, so, you know,
And
this will
can we
be,
have the clerk read the amendment for the?
that's,
Oh.
yeah, that's my plan. Madam Clerk, can you read the amendment that's before us?
Amendment 1 to Board Bill 37, Committee Sub, sponsored by Alderman Shane Cone. To amend said Board Bill under Section 3, definitions on page 5 by striking out the words EJI2 and located on or to the north of Delmar from line 20. Upon adoption, Section 3 definitions will read starting at line 16. Disproportionately impacted geographic areas. For the purpose of the grant program specified in Section 4, disproportionately impacted geographic areas are HUD-qualified census tracts in the city of St. Louis on or to the north of Delmar Boulevard, or areas in the city of St. Louis designated by SLDC as an EJI-1 or EJI-2 Economic Justice Index area.
Okay, so we got it half right. The first sentence is not supposed to include strike out EGI2. So it would leave EGI2 in there. No, it's a Scribner's error, like they can do a friendly amendment. So the language below, as it's supposed to be read is correct.
Okay.
But the striking portion of the first sentence, you need to remove the EGI2 from that sentence.
So noted,
Okay, can you reread the language as it's supposed to be written in the board bill, please?
To amend said board bill under Section 3, definitions are on page 5 and located on or to the north of Delmar Boulevard from line 20. Is that what you want? Upon adoption of Section 3, definitions will read starting at line 16. Disproportionately impacted geographic areas. For the purposes of the grant program specified in Section 4, disproportionately impacted geographic areas are HUD-qualified census tracts in the city of St. Louis on or to the north of Delmar Boulevard, or areas in the city of St. Louis designated by SLDC as an EJI-1 or EJI-2 Economic Justice Index area.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So essentially, this amendment, and if this fails, I'll have another amendment. What this amendment would do would amend the board bill, or committee substitute as we've adopted it, to include EGI-1, EGI-2 areas south of Delmar. My initial thought coming in and having discussions with some folks last night was, to only include EGI-1. That'll be my second amendment. But as it's been continually brought up, we're supposed to be fighting for our constituents. Alderwoman, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, I don't have any of EGI-1 in my ward. EGI-1 is part of Marine Villa. I don't represent Marine Villa. I'm not doing and having this conversation for any type of personal benefit or politics. I'm doing it because I believe that it is the right thing to do to use the data and information before us. However, as an elected official serving the interests of the 3rd Ward, a good portion of my ward is in EJI-2. And the Alderwoman, I'm going to probably mess up ward numbers here, I believe from the 13th, mentioned disinvestment of a year or 2 years. I would beg any of you to drive South Broadway and see the disinvestment. The Limp Brewery has been vacant for decades. It fell, actually, on a good portion of Cherokee Street not too long ago. It still remains partially fallen on what I'll call its campus, on its property. South of the Limp Brewery, vacant lots abound, vacant buildings abound, prostitution, sex work, the unhoused, encampments, probably for another good 2 miles. Poverty is rampant, crime. When you get to that portion of Marine Villa, I just drove through it this morning just to take the scenic route down to City Hall. Overgrown lots, boarded up buildings, trash everywhere, potholes that have been there for probably 5 years. It sits in between Broadway and 55, Interstate 55. Another economic injustice that this city had to endure was the interstate system for a variety of reasons, but not the least of which is the lasting environmental effects that that interstate system has on our neighborhoods and our communities, and the health concerns that it continues to expose our young people and people below the poverty line to CO2 and all sorts of other, trash, literal trash. Marine Villa, this section of EGI 1 of Marine Villa sits in between a vacant commercial corridor and the interstate. The other EGI 1 area is Clinton Peabody. I struggle to even think of a business that's currently located within Clinton Peabody. I really will go back again to say, I think that it is painfully clear that many of you are not familiar with the lack of investment that has occurred, the disinvestment, the intentional disinvestment that has occurred in portions of Southeast City. I am down here for the last 14 years fighting a fight for incentive reform. I've had some wins, I've had some losses. I'd like to think mostly wins. At one point in time when I was chair of the Neighborhood Development Committee, we had a board bill before us that was in, I believe it's the Ville neighborhood. It was a vacant school building. Different administration, different time. SLDC had worked with the developer, and this was in Alderman Moore's ward, so the 4th ward at the time. SLDC was going to give the developer, I believe, 10 years of tax abatement for a vacant school building. The developer said that they wouldn't be able to make money off the project for probably 15 years or more. Meanwhile, we were giving out tax breaks, tax incentives to projects in the Central Corridor. And by Central Corridor, I generally define that as south of Del Mar, north of 44, from downtown to the city limits. We as a city completely obliterated neighborhoods intentionally. We did it with the interstate system. We did it with Mill Creek Valley. We did it with Kosciuszko. Most people don't even know or could point to where Kosciuszko is on a map. Almost nobody knows that that entire neighborhood was completely wiped out, paid for by the taxpayers of this city, just like Mill Creek Valley. North St. Louis certainly has had its own set of issues: white flight, redlining, disinvestment. Southeast City has been home to many black communities for generations. Many families have called South City home for generations. Many of them are my neighbors. who live in Dutchtown. Many are neighbors of mine to the north who live in Graveway Park. This is not about being divisive. It's about recognizing the truth that is before us. We have data. When I first got elected, the mayor's office at the time, I campaigned on a platform of youth engagement and development. Went into the mayor's office, doe-eyed, bushy-tailed, excited to serve. Wanted to get more youth activities, more youth programs, more youth services, more intervention efforts for young people in my community. I was told the data doesn't support it. 2 years later, we had census information out. They came back. They're like, oh my gosh, aldermen, you have young people who live in your community. How about that? Meanwhile, SLPS had closed 2 schools. SLPS had closed 2 schools in an area where 30% of the population was school-aged. Disinvestment. Not just private disinvestment, public disinvestment. The city, the schools, have been disinvesting from Southeast City for a long time. That school closed before I was even elected. That school closed, both of them, the elementary school and the high school closed probably 17 years ago now, 16, 17 years ago. It's not disinvestment that's 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. This is generations of disinvestment in Southeast City. I'm not asking for HUD qualified census tracts to be included in this, as we are in North St. Louis. I'm fine with any HUD qualified census tract north of Del Mar being included in this. I think it's absolutely reasonable. I think it's needed. I am very cognizant and capable to recognize that not every qualified census tract south of Del Mar needs to be included in this. I do believe that we have taken the time, and again, both the people's money and those of our stakeholders, to form an economic justice action plan. And we should be abiding by that plan. We should be living up to the virtues of that plan. St. Louis, it's oftentimes joked, has plenty of plans and nothing of substance. Every time we have a problem, let's hire a consultant, put out a plan, and then nothing happens. Our job here is to also hold ourselves accountable to make sure that we are living up to the plans that we put in place. What good is an action plan if there is no action associated with it? You heard Director Richardson read EGI 1, EGI 2 on the Economic Justice Index, noting high need and opportunity are located in South St. Louis and Graveway Park, Dutchtown, Marine Villa. These areas share many of the same characteristics as those of high need in North St. Louis and should be a priority focus area for SLDC. Those are not my words. Those are the words that we, as a body, also adopted unanimously, if I recall correctly. That action plan was adopted unanimously, just as the previous board bill was, and after that previous board bill was. Because we have the data. We have the data in front of us. We should absolutely be utilizing it. With that, I would ask for your favorable consideration on Amendment Number 1 to Board Bill 37, Committee Substitute.
Discussion? Time for
Yeah, that's
discussion?
what I was gonna ask for, a discussion and go down the line for questions before a vote.
Okay.
So Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Sure, thank you so much. Is it possible for SLDC to answer some questions about EJ1? No? To Alderman Cohn's point about making sure this plan is, talking about this first line here, SLCC concentrates its efforts in EJI1 and EJI2. This is not the only effort that the SLDC is making, correct? This was in the board bill.
That is correct. And even within the Economic Justice Action Plan, we identify some key geographic areas. And within those demonstration areas, we gave examples of the type of activity we would prioritize in areas based on the current demographics, the income levels, the unemployment rate, vacancy, and those sort of data and metrics. Because every neighborhood is unique, every strategy needs to be adapted and customized to meet the needs of that community and the challenges of that community. So for example, because there is a high density of youth that are located in Southeast City, we prioritize workforce development, putting workforce development programs, investing into community organizations and neighborhood capacity building to ensure those youth and the underemployed and unemployed in those areas have access to living and thriving wage jobs, thinking through workforce development programs. And so our strategy overall is about how do we invest our resources that are allocated to SLDC in a very strategic manner and not concentrated just because it's EJI 1 or 2, just looking at investing in a commercial corridor workforce development, really looking at the data, understanding the demographics, and then thinking through strategies around how we invest resources to address the direct concerns and the highest desires for those communities and residents based on the feedback we received and the other reports and studies that were conducted prior to the Economic Justice Action Plan.
And that is separate from this bill. This bill just uses that plan in terms of helping to further define North St. Louis areas that need investment based on this plan.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Alderman Browning.
No questions at this time.
I don't have any questions either.
I renew my motion.
Oh, I had,
Oh,
is it questions? I just had a few comments, just on some of the things that were said before we make our decisions about this, is that, again, I talked about comparison, and Alderman Cone, you and I, and to your point, you said you were from that area. The majority of the areas that are probably 90% of the areas that will qualify for this, I'm not their auto person either. But I'm also a citizen, a resident of City of St. Louis all my life. So I've watched it, and I don't have to take scenic routes to know what's going on in front of my eyes, right? And so when you begin to say we're gonna go back and forth about what you saw and what somebody else sees and what you see now, within, again, the 14 years that you've been out a person, and then you should recognize that it's been that way since you got down here, like you said, and now here's an opportunity for us to take action to a plan, like you said. No, we didn't have EJI, and I mentioned that at first, or EJI, or EJ2. EJI 1 or EJI 2, but we had some of the same, I can probably show you pictures of some of the same properties that look the same way back then, right?
I can do
We
the
can
same,
agree to that.
Alderwoman. Yeah.
Yeah, but you've been I'm still bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and excited and ready to serve. And that's why I'm down here doing exactly what we all should be doing, fighting for communities that have been systemically proven to be underserved uniquely in different ways that others haven't. And again, it's not a comparison to be divisive about. It's not putting race. I know you mentioned, your neighbors, some of your neighbors being of a certain race. It's not about race, but it's about the title of this legislation, North City Commercial Corridor Grants, and keeping the integrity of that. I don't think that anybody put $400,000 into a plan to move the needle, to be used as a tool, rather, to move the needle or pull the rug up under something that was already in place, that people already have applied for, that people already have hope in. I don't believe that they did that to that. So using it like that and keep continuing to use that as an example, I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair to the work they've done, and I don't think it's fair to the communities that will be served by this or have the potential to be served by this. So that's where I come from on that. I know you referenced census data, but we all know the disparity in census data. And we all know how some communities do not respond to the census, like you said. No, but you said you have all of these people in your community. I would question the census data compared to some of the North St. Louis wards. There are rumors of it even being redone because of that, because of the lack of response, not just because of the pandemic. So some of the things that you're referencing, we all understand. But again, to those business owners that had their application on the table, that we all supported, that we all wanted to be in support of something happening, the action you talking behind the plan, using this now to move the needle on them, I think is very disingenuous and very unfair to them and to the north side. And may I add, and I said this earlier, just because we do this on the north side does not mean it won't be done on the south side. It's not a or thing. It won't be this 37 million, because this 37 million was committed to North St. Louis. But that doesn't mean that that's the last dollar, the last cent. And Alderman, you been down here again 14 years that you referenced, I'm sure you've seen how people come down here and fight to get things done for their community and be able to show what the investments have made, because some of the areas in your community and your ward have benefited from it and are continuing to benefit from it. But the areas in North St. Louis have not. And this is their opportunity to. So that is why keeping the integrity of the North St. Louis Corridor Program is important.
So Alderwoman, I would add, this amendment does not change any of the qualifiers for the program. It does not remove any of the language with respect to any of those North City corridors. It keeps them there. Those corridors have additional points that are assigned to them based off of the application process, as we discussed earlier. Minority and women-owned businesses also get additional points through the scoring process. So if you have an applicant, an EGI2 in Dutchtown that applies, and you have one on MLK north of Delmar that's a minority-owned business, and a minority-owned business doing the exact same business, wanting the exact same money, the business on the north side is going to get favor over the applicant in South St. Louis, because that's the scoring system that we have in place. So this amendment doesn't change that. It doesn't remove the priority for North St. Louis. All it does is level the playing field for areas that have also seen significant disinvestment. That's all this does.
That's not what it does, Alderman,
does.
respectfully, that's not what it does. What it does is open up an opportunity, and I guess that's why it was put on my heart to mention some of the things I mentioned earlier. Because first of all, there's no two businesses that you can compare like that, apples to apples. There's no businesses that you can say on paper, they look the same, but it's just they're doing the same thing. They have the same back office, they have the same struggle, they have the same plight, they have the same disinvestment, they have the same, there's no two. This is, first of all, an individual per applicant process. That's first and foremost. But being disingenuous and saying this doesn't change, it absolutely changes, and you know that, because there are businesses that applications are sitting on this table right now that might be eligible, that if you take it from the north, again, the commitment we made to North St. Louis, and I really hate doing it like that, comparing it, but that's what it is. When you take it away from them and open it up, it is taken away from it is taken away from the integrity of the bill. It is taken away from the spirit of the original bill when you open it up to this. I mean, and I don't know how many times we'll be able to, the bottom line is you're fighting for what you're supposed to be fighting for, and which is your constituent, your base, and I get that. None of us are up here saying, we don't believe the need, we don't see the need, we don't hear you, we don't understand you. None of us are saying that. I know I'm not saying that. I don't believe SLDC has said that. But this legislation that was passed for North St. Louis, keeping the spirit and the integrity of it, is what's on the table today. And it is, and without being specific about things, you understand what I'm saying when I say that there are businesses in areas of South St. Louis that would be able to take advantage of something like this and take it away, move the needle, which is what you're doing, from businesses that have been waiting for not only the 2 years of this program's implementation, but decades before that. And you saying, oh, it's just, it's not a change. It's absolutely a change, because the whole premise of the bill is North St. Louis. And we heard in the last hearing of all of the other products that were available citywide. People can go back and run that. But this $37 million that was put in place for North St. Louis to acknowledge and help reinvest in North St. Louis is what's on the table today. And your amendment, I'm sorry, respectfully, I disagree, absolutely changes the spirit of that. Please don't use the work that they did as a tool to make it seem like, oh, it's just because this is now a new plan on the table, we can use this to move this needle from North St. Louis. I'm gonna end it at that.
Thank you. Is there any other questions that anyone on the committee has? Alderman Cone, I do have a question about your amendment. I've read this bill. I have seen it. We've had good conversation offline with both you and Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. I want to ask this question that I know we've kind of stayed away from. Your amendment and changing it, and I guess this is about the intent of the original bill. To me, it seems like the intent of the original bill is to undo historical wrongs, but specifically racially motivated historical wrongs. And so I guess my question about your amendment, and obviously as an alderwoman, I represent Gravois Park, the majority of it, and so I do know of its current context and its current challenges, but we all have different histories in our area, and I'm just curious about, have you thought of some of those differences in as far as the historical reasons for disinvestment? Because it can be true that both areas in the city have disinvestment, but the reasons for the disinvestment are different, and I'm specifically curious about how the race factor in that.
Alderwoman, I would encourage you to look at the demographic information for Southeast City from about 1950 through the present and tell me that it's not racially motivated.
Okay. All right, I think we can call a vote now.
Alderman Cone?
Aye.
Alderwoman Schweitzer?
No.
Alderwoman Sanye?
No.
Alderman Browning?
No.
Chair Clark Hubbard?
No.
One aye vote, four no votes.
And now can we call the roll on Board Bill?
Take a motion.
Oh, yes, can we take a motion for Board Bill 37? I'll accept the motion.
I'll move to pass Board Bill 37 with a due pass recommendation, the committee substitute.
Second.
Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Cone?
Present.
Alderwoman Schweitzer?
Aye.
Alderwoman Sanye?
Aye.
Alderman Browning?
Aye.
Chair Clark Hubbard?
Aye.
One present, four aye votes.
thank you. With that, we still don't have the resolution to review. Thought it was gonna be on this time, the resolution for the committees. So we'll pass that, we'll do that next one. Committee discussions, I will note publicly that next Tuesday, on the 20th, we will have the hearing at 2 p.m. For the Right to Counsel bill, as well as a couple of other bills from my colleagues. And does anyone else have any other committee discussions or announcements?
No.
Okay. Did we have any written testimony today?
No.
Okay, all right, well, with that, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you.